Welcome back to Module 3, Reforming Ohio. In the last several days, we have talked about John D. Rockefeller, a ruthless plutocrat who democratized access to an important but mundane technology, kerosene. And we also talked about George Boss Cox, a corrupt politician who enriched himself and his friends at the expense of the public, yet who also democratized access to local government. Today, our subject is Eliza Mother Stewart, a social activist who sought to judge the moral life of others and reshape their behavior to fit her principles. Stewart also subverted gender stereotypes and democratized the public sphere, opening it to female activity. Let's explore what that means. Eliza Mother Stewart was born in 1816 in Piketon, Ohio, along the Scioto River in Pike County. She led a fairly conventional and sometimes tragic frontier life. Both of her parents died before she had even reached her teens, and her own children had died while they were still young. As a young woman, Stewart trained to be a teacher, then one of the few jobs open to women outside of the home. The Civil War radicalized her. I don't mean that it turned her into a communist or a feminist, but it did show her life beyond the traditional scope of a married woman in the 19th century. She served with the Sanitary Commission, the precursor of the Red Cross. She tended to wounded soldiers, earning the nickname Mother while doing so. She and other women in the Sanitary Commission saw themselves as playing an important role in protecting the nation. They had joined a crusade to protect it from invasion. They didn't command armies, they didn't shoot bullets, they didn't finance the war or devise policies to conduct it. They nurtured people. Now, it was quite common beginning in the mid-19th century to see men and women's natures as fundamentally different. Female nature was defined in opposition to the public sphere, a male world of economics and politics that required a hard, calculating, aggressive, and competitive nature. In contrast, the private world, that of the home, became the woman's sphere. A proper woman built a haven from a heartless world. She was defined by a pious, nurturing character. We call that the cult of true womanhood. And it was, of course, an unattainable ideal for most people, but it shaped the aspirations and therefore the behavior of men and women, especially middle-class women like Stewart. So Stewart, when she left the home to join a crusade to protect the nation by protecting the home, she was doing what a mother should do. And that sense of crusade, of activism to protect the nation by protecting the home, continued after the war had ended. Her chosen crusade was temperance. What was the temperance movement? It was a movement to encourage people to abstain from selling or drinking alcohol. It was not about prohibition, that is, passing laws that compelled people to behave in a particular way. It was a movement grounded in moral suasion, that is, changing individual behavior by persuading, by influencing. Temperance supporters believed that freedom meant something very particular. Freedom meant freedom from addictive vices and bad habits that undermine self-discipline, self-improvement, and respectability. Today, we tend to see the consumption of alcohol less as a bad habit that oppresses individuals, but rather as a consumer choice. It doesn't matter what you choose, only that you choose. For temperance crusaders, however, abstaining from alcohol was a liberating act, an act that demonstrated you could govern yourself. Her choice made sense. The temperance movement resonated with many Ohioans. Why? Let's explore two possible reasons. First, Ohioans had experienced intense urbanization, industrialization, and immigration. Its cities struggled with urban squalor, economic exploitation, and poverty. And migration and immigration to this world was alienating. Most new Ohioans had lived as their ancestors had lived for centuries and centuries. The modern world of anonymous cities, brutal factories, and dense city living was stressful and challenged the stability of family life. And two, the after effects of the Civil War played a role. After the war, there was a noticeable increase in alcohol consumption. In the small town of Washington Courthouse, for example, the number of saloon keepers expanded from 0 in 1860 to 8 in 1870, all for about 2,000 residents. Clearly, the aftershocks of war added to the stress of a state undergoing rapid transformation. Alcohol seemed to offer a salve against social change and post-traumatic stress. We can hear in the words of Mother Stewart a crusade against the bad habit that oppressed people. And we can hear the words of mid 19th century international liberalism as well. She saw herself as part of that global struggle to revive democracy, not by attacking the slave power as Salmon Chase had done, nor by attacking the Austro-Hungarian Empire as Louis Kossuth had done. But like them, she promised to answer the cries of the people, to fight the reign of King Alcohol. She went so far as to say that the curse of intemperance was more fearful than the curse of slavery. She wouldn't fight this curse with cannons and rifles. Instead, she called forth my weakest instruments, my handmaidens, and would set them in battle arrayed against the most powerful enemy of mankind. In other words, she called forth women, pious, nurturing women, the only people who could defend the family and thus the nation, to fight this oppressive, undemocratic power called alcohol. Over the course of 1873 to 1874, there were temperance crusades in 31 states and territories, involving some 54,000 women. 60% of those women protested in Ohio. They marched down main streets, they drafted petitions, they got pledges from people to stop drinking. They picketed saloons, singing hymns at the door as men passed in and out. Often they were harassed, jostled by men, spat upon, drenched in old beer and dirty water. In Ohio alone, there are 300 crusades in 200 different places. The women of Washington Courthouse, for example, met with great success. By 1873, the number of saloons had increased again to 11. After 1 week of crusading, they had managed to persuade the owners of all 11 bars to shut down. And then in 1874, Mother Stewart capitalized on the momentum and helped to found the Women's Christian Temperance Union in Cleveland. This was an organization dedicated to spreading the gospel about temperance and continuing the crusade, changing it from a series of local events to a nationally coordinated effort. Cleveland was the perfect place for the founding of this organization. It was the symbol of the New World, of immigrants, brutal factories, and poverty, and it was the home of Laura Rockefeller, the wife of John D. Rockefeller. She was a dedicated temperance advocate and a founding member of the WCTU. She periodically descended into neighborhoods, especially one called Whiskey Hill, populated mostly by immigrant steel mill workers. She and her friends would surge into a saloon, drop to the floor, and pray for the drunken sinners they found there. John D. would occasionally go with her, and of course he often donated money as well. Stewart had global aspirations as well. In 1876, for example, she toured Great Britain, helping to spread the temperance movement there. She wanted to stop alcohol abuse at the place she considered its source, immigrants. Start temperance movements in Eastern and Southern Europe, for example, and when they come to our community, they won't spoil it with their undisciplined, anti-family, un-American practices. She and many other WCTU members saw immigrants as an alien race. She denounced immigrants for their ignorance of what liberty means, their disregard for the laws and institutions of the land in which they have found homes, their unscrupulous eagerness for gain, their shrewdness in manipulating politicians and elections, intimidating businessmen, bribing legislatures and courts of justice. Now consider that statement for a moment. What is she accusing immigrants of doing? Clearly, you can see Boss Cox and her screed against immigrants. But I guess if your name is Rockefeller, these behaviors are merely acceptable byproducts of the competitive world of capitalism. And her movement did go global, in part because of information networks created by global migrants. For example, take a look at this Italian magazine, Popular Illustrations. This weekly news magazine was something like a Time or a Newsweek in the United States today, reporting on major news stories from around the world and illustrating them with pictures, in this case sketches rather than photos. And this particular news magazine was published in Milan, Italy's largest industrial city. And it was sold in Switzerland and Austria and Germany and Egypt, Britain and Spain, all countries like the US, with many Italian working class immigrants. In other words, this magazine covered topics that addressed the same problems experienced by Italian immigrants in Cleveland, in Milan, in Berlin, in Barcelona, and around the world. Now, this image first appeared in May of 1874 and depicts the Whiskey War in Ohio. The women, having asked in vain that the barn was shut down, are holding a prayer meeting outside the saloon. So let's return to our original statement that Eliza Mother Stewart opened the public sphere for women's participation. By public sphere, I don't mean voting or holding office or doing any of those things that Boss Cox did at City Hall. And I don't mean that women can now enter any occupation they wanted or to be CEO of a multinational company like John D. Rockefeller. By public sphere, I mean a place, physical perhaps, but also intellectual and emotional, in which women could gather, debate the problems that face the nation, and seek to influence the direction that the nation took. Stuart created that space for women. Stuart's temperance crusade, in fact, created a new model of decent, respectable behavior for women. Now consider this image, a propaganda poster celebrating the temperance movement. Here, women are leading the charge because alcoholism eats away at the family, and the family is the backbone of the nation. So women are appropriate warriors in this crusade. They carry axes, they ride horses, they wear protective armor. They seem to do things that men do. They fight to protect the nation. But look at the woman in the foreground. Her features are clearly feminine, from her flowing locks to her soft round face, and even the way she rides side saddle on the horse. These women are warriors, but they haven't given up their femininity. They are doing what women should do: protect the family, in this case against the oppressive king alcohol. But Stuart and Ohio legions had also done something that women had never ever done before, anywhere. They took massive direct action. Here's how one British woman described the Ohio women she so clearly admired. We have no wonderful crusade in England, no such baptism of power and liberty. Baptism. That's an important word because it does evoke a religious experience like a crusade, but also because it suggests rebirth. It suggests that in Stuart's temperance movement, women had been reborn with more power, more freedom than they had before the crusade started. So even though Stuart seems to have confirmed an oppressive, constricting stereotype about women, that they are naturally pious, soft, nurturing defenders of the family, and agreed that women are not hard, calculating, aggressive, and competitive, she also subverted those stereotypes by creating a new space for women to act.